This is CNN.
I'm Roland Evans. Robert Novak and I will question a central figure in one of the biggest state fiscal crises in the nation's history.
He is Republican Governor Pete Wilson of California. At 1:45 a.m. on Wednesday morning, Governor Wilson signed into law a $57 billion state budget that ended 63 days of fiscal gridlock for California that saw the state issue $3.5 billion in IOUs. Wilson forced his principal adversary, Democratic Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, to back down in the face of a threat to prolong the stalemate even longer. With the governor refusing to raise taxes, spending will be cut for welfare, local government, and education. That brought prophecies of doom by Democratic politicians.
20 years ago, we used to spend 20% more than the national average per pupil. Next year, we will be spending 20% less. It is a major, major hit on public education.
Governor, with the prospects of doom being predicted by the state superintendent of public instruction, don't you think the people of California, rather than see their schools go down, would have gone for a state income tax increase?
No, I don't think so, Bob, and I don't think it is necessary. I think that in what are admittedly the most difficult economic times since the Great Depression, instead we are required to engage in the kind of belt-tightening that hit the schools far and away the least. They, in fact, are guaranteed in this budget bill not only the coverage of all enrollment growth, but they will actually have the same amount of dollars to spend per pupil in this year as in the preceding year, and in fact we've made a commitment to achieve that same dollar figure per pupil in the next year. They have very little to complain of in that regard when virtually every other function of state government has been required to take a cut, and in most instances, deep cuts.
And who is going to suffer from this, from these cuts?
Who will suffer?
Yes, sir.
Well, hopefully there will be a minimum of suffering. What we have simply done is to pare back in a number of areas the generosity that has caused California's provision of services to be described as a Cadillac. We are a far more generous state than almost all other states in the provision of almost all state services. And with respect to the tax increase that you asked about, no, it would have been very much the wrong thing to do. It would have been a terrible mistake in a state that is already a very high-tax state. It would have been not only unfair to working families, but it would have been a terrible mistake in terms of driving jobs out by driving employers out to competitor states that do not tax so highly at a time when California desperately needs to increase its employment.
But Governor, you answered my partner's opening question that the per pupil expenditures would not go down, but that completely overlooks what I hear a lot about from out there from the teachers' lobby, that the cost of textbooks, of labor, sweeping schools, buses, all these things are also kept to current levels. Inflation is going up. So, in fact, you won't be able to spend the same amount per pupil, will you, sir?
It will be the same dollar per pupil, and you're correct that it doesn't take into account the very minimal inflation that we currently have now. But, Roland, if you want to get a good idea of what we're doing, it's very much as though your boss came to you and said, Roland, if we've got a good year in the company this year, why, it's January now, but in June we'll give you a 6 to 7% increase. And then in May, he comes back to you and says, we haven't had a good year, we've had a rotten year. We have lost money, therefore I can't give you the 6 to 7% increase that we talked about in January. Instead, I'll just hold you even, but by the way, you ought to know that everybody else on the staff is taking deep cuts. Now, that's an exact analogy to what has happened here in California, and the favored child, the clear priority of state government, is education. But we can only go so far. We cannot absolutely savage health care. We cannot so injure local government that we interfere with adequate police and fire protection.
Well, we're going to get into health and welfare in a second, but I have another question. Delane Easton, who I think is the chairwoman or the chair of the Legislative Education Committee, doesn't agree with you at all, sir. She said, I think I'm quoting her right, this battle will now go to the streets. And she said, the governor, he is a terrorist. How do you explain that? It's rather bitter, isn't it?
I explain it simply by saying that I think Ms. Easton has indicated that in the classic liberal tradition, she has absolutely no regard whatever for fiscal responsibility. On the very last night of the session, before the Democrats finally surrendered on this point, she sent down yet another bill that contained in it the certainty of a deficit in the current budget year of $1.8 billion and the probability of another $1.7 billion next year. I promptly vetoed it. I think she knew I would. She's running for superintendent of public instruction. Even that in no way excuses that kind of incredible irresponsibility.
But you're telling us, sir, that on who gets hurt as a result of this new budget, you're telling us the kids of your state are not going to get hurt despite this big whack at the education expenditures in California. You saying that flatly?
Yes, I am saying that, because if in fact the school districts, and let me remind you something, the state is in a very interesting position. We collect the money from the taxpayers, but it is actually spent by people who do not collect it, 1,000+ school districts throughout the state of California. If they are foolish enough, and some have been, unfortunately, to engage in the kind of multi-year collective bargaining agreements that they cannot afford, simply betting on the come that the state is going to bail them out, then they are irresponsible fiscal managers. And yes, we believe that education is investment. Historically, California has given it the highest priority, but not an unlimited priority. We cannot say that we will engage in overpayment beyond the generous requirements of the law. In order to do that, we would have to savage health care, local government provision of police and fire, and also, as an alternative, there would be the ongoing pressure, which the Democrats in the Assembly do not mind in the least, for further tax increases after the election. And I repeat, that will simply jeopardize what is already a jobs climate in need of mending.
Governor, President Bush, at the recent Republican convention, said that he had made a mistake in 1990 by sponsoring a tax increase. The following year, 1991, your first year as governor, you sponsored a tax increase. Would you like to join your president in saying you made a mistake in raising taxes in 91?
Well, I said at the time that I thought that it was a mistake in terms of the impact that it would produce for the economy, because the worst time to increase taxes is, in fact, in a recession. We have, unlike the federal government, a balanced budget requirement in our state constitution. Wisely so, properly so. It is a tragedy that the federal government doesn't have it, and that as a result we've had 50 years of deficit spending. I would have to say that we did so knowing that it would not have a good effect on our economy. I would also tell you that after we had cut $5 billion in spending, it was pretty clear to me that the legislature had no stomach to go further. And I think that the fact that we did increase taxes is something that we need to bear in mind, and something that we will undo. One of the things I've been fighting this past year is repeated efforts by the Democrats in the legislature to make permanent a temporary half-cent sales tax that is due to expire next year.
Are you implying, Governor Wilson, that the tax increase that you came under terrific criticism from the right wing of the Republican Party for, are you implying that that tax increase contributed to the economic situation and the economic problems in the state, which has compounded your budget difficulties?
To a degree. To a degree. We were in a Hobson's choice. First place, well, let me finish since you asked the question.
Yeah.
In the first place, we do have a balanced budget requirement. In the second place, we did have to close a $14 billion gap last year and an $11 billion gap this year because of the continuing deepening of the recession. We did so knowing that we would hardly be adding to the attractiveness of a state, one of 50 in competition with the other 49, by increasing our taxes. But we did have to do something that I think, we had to avoid something that I think even worse, and that's the kind of Washington-style deficit spending that has led to a national debt that has grown so huge that now 27 cents of every tax dollar that you and I send to Washington goes not for investment in the future, but instead simply to pay off the debts of the past.
Well, just very briefly, sir, would you say now, if you had it to do over again, and we never have our things to do over again, but if you had to do over again as a newly elected governor, would you have tried to put the legislature's feet to the fire more, to cut more before you went to a tax increase, to cut more in spending?
Yes, I would, but what I would have to tell you is that I would also need better support than I was able to get from the legislature. And here I'm talking about people who were supposed to be legislative allies.
You mean Republicans?
Yes, sir, I certainly am. Some who this year were not very helpful because they were more active lobbyists for the teachers' union than the actual paid lobbyists.
Governor, on the welfare matter, I understand that you have something like 3.5 million people on welfare, and that most of these are children. Is that accurate?
Roughly accurate, yes.
Yeah. Do you think the time has come when you ought to, and I ask you this very seriously, because most of those children don't have fathers, is that correct? Or don't have fathers living at home, don't have fathers who are married to their mothers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you think it's time that California ought to pass a law restricting the size of families? I ask that very seriously.
Well, I reply very seriously. The answer is yes, which is why we have proposed that.
How much? To what level? I didn't know that.
Yes, it is part of the initiative that we have placed on the ballot because it was clear we could not get it through the legislature. It is a ballot proposition called Proposition 165,
I understand
the Taxpayer Protection Act, and it contains essentially two parts. One relates to reform of the budget process, the other to the substantive reform of the law of welfare, and that is one of the provisions.
But you wouldn't go as far as China has gone in actually legally attempting to limit the number of children that a family can have? Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, yes, I think it's probably unenforceable, and I think what we need to do is very much what other states are talking about doing. One has actually done it that I know of, interestingly enough. A black inner-city Democrat representing Camden was the author of a provision of that kind that has passed the New Jersey legislature and been signed into law by Governor Florio. That is one of the provisions of our initiative here in California for the November ballot.
Governor, you're a pro-choice Republican on abortion. You were tied up, and you were not with your fiscal crisis. You were not in Houston for the convention. If you had been in Houston, would you have tried to amend the anti-abortion plank in the Republican platform?
No, not at this convention. In fact, I made a speech by satellite to the California delegation urging that they not attempt to do that because I thought that, number one, it would lose, and secondly, it would provide nothing but comfort in a floor fight that would be televised, nothing but comfort for Bill Clinton, particularly considering that California is the one state critical to his election.
And you are implying then, and you have implied, I believe, that you would lead the fight in 1996 to remove or to modify the anti-abortion plank in the platform. Wouldn't that split the Republican Party right down the middle in 96?
It will, no doubt, but I think that there is obviously a time in advance of 96 when those of us who are in fact pro-choice need to say that while we were willing to avoid the kind of floor fight at that convention that would have only comforted the Democratic opposition, that those who comprise the majority of the Republican Party, as pro-choice members do, are entitled to a platform that reflects their views.
So you're telling us you are going to make a serious effort to change that platform plank?
Yes, I think that you can count on that, and I think that there will be a great many people who agree that it is only fair that we do so. But again, for reasons that are admittedly entirely practical, we don't intend to engage in that kind of a struggle this fall because we think that it is critical that George Bush be reelected.
Governor, President Bush, whom you just mentioned, seems to be willing to spend the kitchen stove, the baby in the bath, and just about everything else in Washington to fix that tragedy down in Florida. Do you think you got as good a break after the San Francisco earthquake from the federal government and George Bush as Florida's getting now?
I'm not really in a position to make a comparison. I don't know what Florida is getting. Florida has been devastated by a terrible hurricane. I would have to say, based on a very superficial knowledge of what has occurred there, that the damage and that the suffering as a result of Andrew exceeded even the momentous quake that we call Loma Prieta in 1989.
What about Los Angeles and the riots, number one? And number two?
We have no complaint. Frankly, the federal government, I think, has not only been in there very quickly, but the cooperation with local government and with state government has been extraordinary.
15 seconds before we break. Governor, do you think this cut, particularly the welfare side of the budget, will exacerbate the situation in Los Angeles that led to the riots earlier this year?
No, I don't think so. I think that it shouldn't. It's the alternative to crowding out necessary investment in education and preventive programs for children.
We're going to have to take a break, Governor Wilson. After these messages, my partner and I will be back with the big question for Pete Wilson.
What if we could make all the clean air and water we need?
What if there was enough food for everyone?
What if we understood the aging process?
What if we cared so much about education we made the most of every mind?
What if research in space made life better on Earth?
We're helping to build Space Station Freedom, the next step in space exploration, and a new way to look at the home planet.
In our universe, there is always the unknown, the unpredictable. All we can do is prepare for it.
AT&T is now installing Fast Start. It can detect a cable cut instantly, so 800 calls can get back in minutes instead of hours.
We can send flowers for any occasion, anywhere, but only if our 800 service is up and running. Our 800 service isn't just a phone line, it's a lifeline.
I miss you.
AT&T has the most reliable 800 service, period.
AT&T. Call us.
The world's most comfortable mattress would be one you couldn't feel at all. That's the idea behind Sealy's Posturepedic sleep system, designed to support everyone differently, to conform to every curve, distribute your weight evenly. Only Sealy Posturepedic has it, and for a more comfortable night's sleep, there's nothing like it.
Monday, this is Uncle Sam's Lumber Yard, caught between politicians and preservationists. The fight over how national forests should be used. Timber or Trees, a special Prime News series beginning 8 p.m. Eastern Monday.
Governor, the big question. If the polls would show today that Governor Clinton is virtually unbeatable in California and way ahead of President Bush, stay that way for the next 6 weeks, would you advise George Bush to stop throwing good money after bad in your state and spend it where he might have a good result?
If I thought that that were going to be the inevitable result, sure, of course I would.
And do you think it is?
No.
Any explanation? What's going to bring him back?
Well, I think that California is a state that has always been volatile, that the focus really has not yet taken place on the essential differences between the two men, between their records. And I think, frankly, that when that occurs, Californians who tend to be essentially conservative fiscally, who tend to be very strongly in favor of the kind of responsibility that George Bush demonstrated as a young man, I think they're going to make a decision, probably a narrow decision. It's always a narrow decision in California in favor of the Republican candidate, as they have in most of the last presidential elections within the memory of most of the people who will be voting in this one.
Governor, has anybody from the president's campaign told you we're going to cut our losses in California, or hinted to you they might?
No.
What is the problem with George Bush in California? It's been said for a long, long time that there is a problem, that he doesn't feel comfortable with California. Do you think there is such a problem?
No, I don't. Having observed him out here repeatedly and having observed the reaction of Californians to him, including those who are not Republicans, not those who are predictably responsive, who are cheerleaders, I don't see that. I don't see evidence of that at all. I don't think there's a California problem. I think that George Bush's problem in California and across the country is that there is a global recession, a worldwide recession of a severity that we have not seen since the Great Depression.
Governor, we just have a few seconds. Your popularity rating before this last signature on the budget was about 20%. Do you feel gratified that your popularity is almost three times as high as the state legislature? And doesn't that tell you something about government in this country?
It tells me that, yes, it does, and it also tells me that people who are not watching, well, I'll have to put it this way. The coverage of the protracted budget struggle has not really enlightened very many people. They know only that it has been going on for 78 days, that in some cases there's been real and I think inexcusable hardship. I would have signed the budget that I did sign 2.5 months ago.
Thank you very much, Pete Wilson. My partner and I will be back with some comments after these messages.
There are a lot of smart reasons to apply for the American Express card. Just call us at 1-800-THE-CARD.
And you can handle the unexpected.
I can't believe they canceled our flight.
You're not stranded. You can rent a car, change your plans, whatever.
It'll be fine. It's just a great day. It's a beautiful drive.
Because unlike a bank card, the American Express card has no preset spending limit.
So call 1-800-THE-CARD. You can apply right over the phone.
With the American Express card, you're in control. You pay your bill in full. There's no revolving debt, no outrageous interest. You stay out of that trap.
Apply now, and if you qualify, you'll soon be enjoying the benefits of card membership.
And when you travel, you'll feel secure.
I still don't know where I lost that wallet. My whole life was in it. Pictures, license.
So we're on bread and water?
Oh, no. New card.
If you ever lose the card or it's stolen, you can get a replacement in 24 hours.
Virtually anything you buy with a card is protected from damage or theft. For 90 days, up to $1,000. So call 1-800-THE-CARD.
Where are your skis? Somebody stole them at lunch, and I just bought them. What are you gonna do? I called American Express, and it's all set. But why are you here? Hey, I can still enjoy the view.
You can apply right over the phone.
You can get medical and legal referrals while traveling as well.
Good. Well, the medicine. Did you tell them we lost my medicine?
Yep, a new prescription's waiting for us.
All you need to do is call American Express. No bank card can offer you all the benefits of American Express. All around town, all around the world.
Don't delay. Call 1-800-THE-CARD and apply now.
The card, the American Express card. Don't leave home without it.
Well, the governor was very upbeat on whether this was a real cost to the pupils per pupil spending. But I tell you, Bob, everything I read shows that now at 38th on the list of per pupil spending, California is in the soup on education.
Pete Wilson sounds like a born-again anti-taxer. He kind of indicated that if only the Republicans had been with him, he wouldn't have had to raise taxes before. He said it hurt the economy, and he sounded more like Jack Kemp than Pete Wilson.
And he also said if the polls really hang up there for Clinton over Bush, yes, he will tell the president, save your money, Mr. President. If it comes to that, spend it where you might get some votes. But he doesn't think that's going to happen.
And as a possible presidential candidate in '96, he says he's going to fight for the pro-choice position of the Republican Party, conservative on economics, pro-choice on abortion. That's a big impulse inside the Republican Party in a fight ahead. I'm Robert Novak.
I'm Roland Evans.
For a transcript, send $5 to Journal Graphics, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203, or call 1-303-831-9000.
With each new day, you find a way to be your best.
Gillette Sensor for the closest, safest shave ever.
You know you gotta be a little better than the rest.
Only Gillette Sensor has spring-mounted twin blades that sense and adjust to every detail of every face. Gillette Sensor, when you're the best, there's no feeling like it.
Gillette, the best of men to get.
He's in Manhattan on Wednesday, Frankfurt on Thursday, Paris, Rome, and Vienna after that. He believes it's better to do business across a table than over a fax machine. This year, he'll fly more than 100,000 miles with us because he knows nobody understands him better than we do. At Delta, when we say we love to fly and it shows, this is where it shows.
I remember her tickling me around my thighs.
You're taught that you must not tell.
Nearly 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 7 boys fall victim to incest. Don't miss an encore presentation of Breaking the Silence, Sunday.
I'm John DeDakis at the CNN Center at Atlanta. Travel Guide is up next, but first, this news update. Officials at the Naval Academy in Annapolis are not laughing at what was supposed to be a joke from Howie Mandel. While appearing at the school last month, the comedian jokingly invited women in the audience to perform oral sex. This while the Navy is still smarting from the alleged tailhook sexual abuse scandal. The Academy is asking Mandel for its money back, and the school superintendent has apologized for Mandel's remark. John Mellencamp is a married man again. The musician's publicist says that he tied the knot with model Elaine Irwin Saturday. About 200 people attended the wedding, which was held outside Mellencamp's cabin in southern Indiana. This is the third marriage for 40-year-old Mellencamp. It's the first time around for his 23-year-old bride. Just ahead, as CNN Weekend continues, a Ku Klux Klan member is arrested at a rally because of his pointed hood. Workers at several GM plants are now back in business. And some pets who were separated from their owners by Hurricane Andrew find a safe haven.
Unforgettable. Nothing brings back memories like the music you love. And nothing brings back your favorite hits of the 50s like your hit parade from Time Life Music. You'll get legendary artists like Perry Como.
Don't let the stars get in your eyes, don't let the moon break your heart. See the pictures
Joe Stafford.
along the night.
Nat King Cole.
They try to tell us we're too young.
Doris Day.
Whatever will be, will be. Chances are
Johnny Mathis.
'Cause I wear a silly grin.
The Mills Brothers.
Shine little golden glimmer.
And the memories begin with 24 all-time hits from 1954.
Hey there,
Rosemary Clooney.
you with the stars in your eyes.
Tony Bennett.
Take my hand, I'm a stranger in paradise.
The Chordettes.
Mr. Sandman.
Call now to get 24 of your favorite hits from 1954 at the special price of just $9.99 for compact disc or double-length cassette. Then audition other great hit parade albums, each for 10 days free.
Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart.
So call now and relive the romance.
To order Hit Parade 1954, use your credit card and call 1-800-426-3300. Or send $9.99 for one double-length cassette or one compact disc, plus $3.50 shipping and handling to Hit Parade 1954, P.O. Box 1880, Department 02, Alexandria, Virginia.